Tap back in. Could be a game winner on the line. How clever was that?
I did say it was one of the best spoil I've ever seen. To him in the change room as you fall.
My face currently feels like I've been run through by Tom Stewart.
Revolt runs in, touched up the boot. He came up behind him like a librarian.
Puts it to the top of the square. Oh, beautiful little fist in there by Dale. Crucial centimetre moments.
He's going to come back. Hear the scream.
He definitely has a bit of the Belcho spirit. As I have a bit of the Belcho spirit.
All respect to all the defenders out there. It's not an easy job and it's an unheralded job, but they do a bloody good job. So, well done.
Hello and welcome back to The Back Pocket. We've got a new intro, we've got new microphones and a new AFL season. And definitely there's been no overreactions in the media this week whatsoever. Not one.
None. There's never been a overreaction in the AFL media ever.
Very normal round one. No one talking about teams that, lost or unexpectedly won like it's a whole year-changing thing. Definitely not Fremantle, who, if everyone remembers, almost lost to Adelaide in round one last year. It's fine. It's round one. It's okay. It's very strange to me. But we're here, we're back. It was a great week for defenders if we're looking at like base defensive stats.
I've just realised that I've not written down any notes for one of my votes here.
Hell yeah. Off
Very
the cuff.
professional.
Hopefully I also have that person, so I have some notes. We'll see how we go. But yeah, why not? Let's dive right into it because there's a lot to talk about this week, and I feel like the votes are going to be the least interesting part of this episode.
Yeah, well, it's the first vote episode of the season, Jack. Why don't you explain how it works?
Well, okay.
What people are winning?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a medal, which we have, sort of. The Scarlett Silvagni medal for the best defender. There's also the Champion Data Award at the end of the year for the best statistical defender, which is just stats-based, so we don't vote on that. But
that one's for nerds. We don't really talk about that.
1 through 5, best players of the round across all games. Each of us give that. Maximum 10 votes, minimum 1. Roll away. Do you want to start the votes?
Yeah, I'll start the votes. My one vote goes to the one I have no notes for, which is Jake Lever.
Jake Lever, okay.
Yeah, so I've given Jake Lever one vote, mainly for the fact that he played so well without Stephen May.
Yeah, I have definitely got some notes down for Lever, which is good because he said he didn't.
Yeah.
I'll say that with the new exciting Bulldogs tall forward line and no Stephen May, and Lever just one-arms them. He had 21 touches at 90%, 13 intercepts. There was a total of 2 goals between Norton, Lobb, Darcy, Ugelhagen and English.
Yeah. And not all of that's just down to Lever. The team defence really dismantled the Bulldogs, which is something that they don't have, which I will touch on later.
And the Bulldogs seemed very confused about who was in what jumper. I know they both wear blue and red, but they are distinctly different blue and reds.
They kept kicking it to Lever. And, there's been doubts about him last year. When May was out, Melbourne struggled. And it's been a big problem for them. But him showing up round one and dominating like that,
best
huge
game
for
he's played
them.
since their premiership year, I think.
Yeah, probably.
He was really good. My one vote was to the Big Rat. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it was impressive. He basically nullified Dan McStay. I sent you a stat earlier today about how of all the new recruits, McStay had the lowest AFL rating. I don't think they're 100% on who's a good player, but that was a pretty big stat. And the one goal McStay got was for just a goofy move from Radaglia. Wasn't really a free, but if you fall for that every time, you're going to give away a free. He'll learn from that. But his spoiling was great. His marking was exciting. I hope he just learns to spoil at the right times more often. I think that's going to be his biggest weakness, but I really liked what I saw.
I had Radaglia in the mentions, but after going over it time and time, I struggled to give votes to someone who gave away up to 3 or 4 goals. Yeah. And that was the margin.
We got 3 votes from each coach as well, which surprised me. I looked through it, 3 from each. They both thought he was the third best player on ground.
Which he had some moments. In the third quarter, he had 2 or 3 efforts in a row, which were fantastic.
He kept Geelong in it once Stuart was out of the game.
Truly did not make up for the several goals he gave away.
Yeah. But I thought, imagine telling someone in October of 2021, after Geelong lost to Melbourne by a gajillion, that Isaac Smith, Asava Radicalier and Graham Myers would be Geelong's 3 best players in round 1 2 years later.
Someone just came out, ex-Geelong person in the media, and said Asava Radicalier was a lock for future All-Australian as a defender. I can't remember who it was.
But I think he has the potential. But like a lock is
it's one game.
Yeah.
2 technically he's done in defence in AFL level, but
against North last time, which we even said last year that it was hard to give him votes because there was nothing to
North
compete
stats.
against. But anyway, that was my one vote. I enjoyed his game.
All right, 2 votes from me. Glad to see him back in the votes because he didn't feature a lot last year. Alia is getting 2 from me.
2 votes from me as well.
Awesome. I love it when it lines up. I've got some stats here that don't really matter. 7 marks. High efficiency at 87%.
Yep.
9 intercepts, 4 rebound 50s, a couple of 1%ers to go with it.
Yeah, 7 spoils. I said that he was super effective despite the limited number of disposals we had. Our call for the most underrated backline really showed up with Port this week. Brisbane's forward line is strong and they kept them to bugger all score.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see how he goes with Mackenzie out, but Clury coming back in should, I think, cover that. It's more than well enough.
It's mainly just good to see him play well, considering how down he looked last year.
Yeah, at the end of the year, he just looked like he'd been playing a one-man squad for the last 5 weeks and was frustrated.
So it's nice to see him kind of break out again and have a good game, remind everyone why he's so good. Yeah. And obviously it wasn't just the defence that held up. Their midfield looked miles better.
They looked really good. Horn Francis was brilliant in his first game for them.
In tandem, those 2 things, a good defence and a rollicking midfield, should do them well for the year. We'll see how they go against Collingwood.
Back this week as well was a big in. So, yeah,
I'm interested to see how that changes up because I think the youthful midfield was a switch up that possibly
it's
wasn't
interesting
expected.
To see who goes out for Boak.
Yeah,
because you don't want to drop one of those kids who was the run and the excitement. So,
not at all.
I agree with that. Who was your 3?
My 3 is friend of the podcast. No, favourite of the podcast, Mason Redman.
Yep.
I love the way Mason Redman plays.
I have a special mention for Redman, but it was the Hawks tax. It's like the Roos tax.
Yeah, I've got written down here, I'm very close to giving him the It's Against Hawthorn tax, but it's only round 1.
Yeah.
They haven't been consistently bad yet.
Redman, the Zerk, and Ridley all had really good games.
The Zerk. Are you running with that this year?
Well, was that or BZT?
Just call him Zerk Thatcher, man.
I thought all 3 of them were really good. We talked a lot about Zerk Thatcher in the few leading up to the season, about how we really wanted to see how he did this year. And I know it wasn't against much. They didn't have Bruce. They also don't have...
Jekka?
No.
Or
the kid.
Lewis Mitchell.
Lewis Mitchell was also out. So like the forward line wasn't much. So the 3 talls had a lot in their favour. But they still performed as well as they literally could have. Like you can only play who you're playing against.
Yep.
I had Redmond in my votes for a little bit when I was moving them around.
He just
kind of slid out.
Redmond plays old school. That's what I like.
He broke out the horns again. Just said that when he kicked the goal.
Did he? I didn't notice the horns, but he kicked 2 goals.
He kicked 2 goals,
which for a defender, that's a good effort.
And genuinely played backline. Like it wasn't like he moved up forward. He just ran down the ground and kicked 2 goals.
He had 2 possessions in the forward 50, just outside the 50-metre mark, and he got 2 goals.
Beautiful kick of the footy, regardless where he's on the ground. Doesn't get the defender wobbles up forward.
No. He's a clutch player.
Such a fan of Redmond. I wish he played for someone else.
Fits the name though.
I saw something about. It felt like they were just trying to destabilise them. I can't remember who said it. They were like, Essendon are just, a ticking time bomb.
Oh, that was Carolyn Wilson.
Oh, was it? Yeah, it makes sense that she'd say that. I was like, just let them have a win.
I'm happy to let them have the win. I think that they were running that story regardless. And if they'd lost, it would have been a smoking gun. But because they won, no one cares.
And we know there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Maybe in 2 or 3 weeks, people will care again.
I think Sheeds is the biggest problem at that club. The ticking time bomb is just if you get rid of Sheeds, you probably diffused it.
I think Sheedy and Dodoro have a bit too much power around there.
It's amazing that one person who's just on the board, isn't the president or anything, can have so much power at a club. In fact, enough power to sack the president.
Yep.
Very strange. My 3 votes was to Brennan Cox.
Okay.
I thought Freo's backline, it was hard to give them votes when they lost that game.
I'm being a miser. I'm not giving any Fremantle.
Yeah, I definitely couldn't to the others. Ryan and Young, spoilers, aren't getting into my top 2.
No.
Despite their massive disposals. I just think that Cox kept Freo in that game when they really shouldn't have been, to be honest. He had
of the 3.
14 of his 30 disposals were intercepts. He had 3 contested marks and 5 rebound 50s and 13 spoils, which I think is just a phenomenal effort. Despite the disposals that Ryan had, he got monstered by Mason Wood, even though he only kicked 2 goals. Freo were hugely disappointing.
It's look, I think they all had great performances. Each of them had really good defensive stats.
Yeah.
I could find a reason to give them votes, whether it be 1, 2, or 3, but stopping those inside 50s and then just turning it back over or leading to ineffectual
that was, for me, the difference
plays.
with Brendan Cox. He had chains that ended up inside the forward 50 more than the other two did.
More
and
than
less,
inside the 50.
Less chip around stuff than I think Young and Ryan contributed with each other. But
they had 50
was a
plus
stinker.
score launches from D50 and resulted in 2 goals. That's not good
depressing.
enough.
And
that's all across all 3 of them, because they all had, 46 marks between them?
Ross Lyon must be just smarmy and annoying this week. I did enjoy, though, that said, despite my opinions of Ross Lyon, when he went in for his media conference, he forgot his lanyard.
Oh, did he?
And one of the journalists said, "Oh, it's all right, we know who you are, Ross." And he just muttered under his breath, "Yeah, unfortunately."
That's kind of funny.
Which I thought was a good laugh. Yeah, Freo clearly didn't listen to that tape that got leaked because they had no idea what was going on. It was just the normal Ross Lyon game plan, but with play on. Like, that was all it was. Like, they just played on down the middle instead of kicking it around. Other than that, it was the same rush everyone towards the ball, push it to one side of the ground, play we've seen for years.
He said one thing in the pre-season, which was, if there's one thing this list can do, it's run.
Yeah, and he implemented that. I thought, despite his not a huge amount of disposals, I still thought Sinclair was really good. Their backline holds together so well. We mentioned them with Port as, one of the underperforming ones with not many stars, but play a good footy.
I think Callum Wilkie's another one this week who's not getting any votes from me, but played a really good game.
He was one for me that I had in my mentions. I just think that it was weird that there was a lot of mention about Fyfe and even Jackson, and I thought, well, the ball didn't get in there with any kind of actual direction. Like, it was so easy for St Kilda to pick it off with the way the midfielders were just blasting it in. It wasn't their fault. Like, Fyfe one game up forward where the midfielders just made it hard for him all game. You can't really make his season off of that. I think that
we saw 2 pre-season games for Fyfe where he kicked 3 goals each, and you can say, oh, they're just pre-season games, but he knows forward
he's
craft.
strong and he's fast, and he spent all season learning how to kick on goal.
You can say the same thing about Rory Lobb, totally ineffectual for the Bulldogs, but it was because they kept kicking over his head.
I liked that he's off for a little bit of surgery. Not like just a little bit, just like he's gone popping down the shops. Just going to get some toothpaste, some water and some surgery.
4 tours is too many.
It was, and it showed that it was. They looked slow. It's so funny that we've come this far from the Bulldogs team who had Zane Cordy as a centre-half forward in a premiership year.
Well, yeah.
And now they're overly tall. Like, they've got abundance, and they're playing them all. Like, you can't justify it. Except for Jordan Sweet. Poor bugger, he's just hanging out in the VFL.
Which is so weird because I know Rory Lobb's doing the second ruck role, but you feel like that would be...
Maybe he comes in this week.
Possibly.
And then they'll still be too tall.
All right, back to votes. My turn?
Your turn.
You
for
did
4.
3?
Yep.
Yeah, 4 I'm giving to Daniel Rioli.
He was... I had him in, I dropped him out. He's not in mine, but he was brilliant.
I think we talked about this a few times last year, mostly with Jack Sinclair. There are those games that rebounding defenders have where it is a balance of defence and offence, and I think Rioli hit that perfectly. Honestly, Richmond probably should have won that game with the way they were going with their inside 50s, but to Carlton's defensive credit, they held up quite well. Danny Rioli had 5 rebound 50s and 5 inside 50s.
I'm pretty sure he got the 10 coaches' votes that game. He was really good. I really enjoyed his game. We mentioned this pre-season as well. His reinvention as a defender, for someone who dropped out of that team as a pressure forward because his pressure wasn't good enough, they figured that his ball use is so good, which it is. He's elite by foot. He's so valuable coming off the back flank. Brisbane tried to do it with Rayner on the weekend. He looked at sea. He's a forward midfielder. I don't know what they thought they were doing, putting him in the back line. He's a playmaker. He's not, and playmaker I mean a burst and excitement player. He's not a set-up play. He's not a slow, methodical footballer. It didn't work, and they got belted. I think they'll fix that next week. He'll play surely forward and mid. But Rioli is a whole new footballer and great to watch.
You can't just chuck someone back there. They have to actually want to thrive, and I feel like Rayner wants to be a midfielder.
Yeah, he wants to be the Dustin Martin prototype.
Yeah. Just some of these stats. 93% efficiency off 27 disposals, 8 intercepts, 10 pressure acts, 5 rebound and 5 inside 50s. Like, that's pretty balanced. That's really good.
My 4 might be your 5, I'm not sure. But my 4 was to Lewis Young. No votes?
No votes.
Crazy. I thought... he
really
slid around for me this week. But it felt like he was everywhere watching that game. He had 20 touches, 14 of them were intercepts. It was less spoils than usual, but he was just marking everything. So like the spoils weren't really there. The smothers and pressure he put on were huge. And I debated after a moment, like the Saturday after watching that game, the Friday, sorry, after watching that game the Thursday night, whether he was the best defender in the game. But I kind of changed my mind. I think his smother on Lynch on the goal line was so instrumental that it probably... And I don't think just saved the game because of the goal. I think Richmond would have gone 2 or 3 goals up after that. It was inspirational to keep Carlton in it. It deflated Richmond for the next 5 minutes.
Was that when they just kicked... Well, they were about to kick their third
and he just
2 back?
Sprinted with Lynch and just like dove across the footy and pushed it through for a point. And I think it made him still a goal up or something before Lynch eventually kicked that goal. But I just thought acts like that, and he had several of them throughout the game, was so instrumental in that game that he deserved it for me.
I think Wiedering and Young are really good in tandem because they can both play the roving intercept, and it looks like they're both able to play lockdown now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed seeing them. We talked about it in the pre-season game, but they really do seem to have swapped roles this
Depending
season.
on their matchup, I think they can swap it. Like
the extra height of Young really helps when the forward line doesn't have that giant forward. If you're playing against a team with Tom Hawkins or someone, he's going to play on the 200 centimetre forward. But when they've only got a Jack Rewalt and a Tom Lynch, who are both tall but not monsters, you can have Wiedering line up on them, and he can take those marks.
Yeah, and it's like in the preseason, you saw Wiedering do a really good job on Buddy Franklin. I wouldn't trust Lewis Young on Buddy Franklin. But depending on the height and like athleticism,
but like
I'd
put Wiedering on. I'd put Young on Cox.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's I have them, both of those in my special mentions.
Yep.
I thought they played
in my special mentions. He played an amazing game as well.
They played really well, really resilient, especially with how many times
Richmond pushing
in
second
forward
half,
50. But they just didn't fall over the line in the end for me.
That's fair enough. All right, well then, who was your 5?
Dane Rampy.
Okay, I had him in my special mentions. He was good.
I think it's impossible to not give him votes this week.
I didn't.
That stuns me. If you have a look at his heat map in particular, I don't know if you want to bring it up.
I did see it. It was just like block hole in that 50 and like in the middle of it.
He was a wall, and I'm not going to give a Gold Coast tax yet. If they continue to be terrible,
they were poor,
possibly. But Sydney are also
Sydney came out with a point to prove.
Yes.
That
you
was
can only beat who's in front of you.
That was an angry side who wanted to prove themselves after how disappointing last year was, and I don't think it would have mattered how good Gold Coast played. They might have just got closer.
Yeah.
Sydney are an immensely talented football team. They've just got playmakers all over the ground. You look at the way Parker played again. You look at the way Goulden is just coming on as a footballer. Warner was phenomenal.
I'm certain if there were any Swans not playing who weren't at the ground watching them or watching on TV, they'll be extra fuel in the fire because the commentary mentioned the 81-point loss 15 plus times throughout the game. So
it's ridiculous.
Round one's over. Let's move on from talking about the loss.
Our boy...
Maybe when they play Geelong, bring it up.
Our boy Sam Collins got rubbed out of that game by a typical Buddy Franklin brain fade that he again got a under punishment for because
let's not talk about the forwards just yet. We'll cover Sam Collins in a little bit.
That was ugly.
But no,
Rampy was great. I agree with you. I
25
thought that
disposals.
McCartan was also really good. McCartan, I thought he played a really good game too.
The 12 intercept possessions and 11 pressure acts from Rampy that really impresses me. Plus, I think double-digit
Lloyd as well.
too.
I thought was back to his best.
I did like
a really
Lloyd's
down
game.
year last year. I wonder if they don't talk about players having the small injuries that just hamper them, but they can still play footy. I think that the way he was moving, he looked like himself again.
Yeah.
After the second half of last year, he looked slow and not quite there. So the Moustache Brothers for them were good again.
Moustache Brothers, that's new. All right, who's your 5?
My 5 votes was to your 1. I thought Lever was brilliant.
Okay. All right.
Like I said, it was the fact that he was almost a lone hand against that sea of giants forward line. And it was the fact that he has the athleticism to just move within them and just pick them off. I don't really think we need to talk about him more, but I thought he was really, really good in that game. Especially, people talk about with May out, how are they going to defend? It didn't matter. Lever did it all. And that's not to knock the fact that, like you said, their midfield and other defenders were very good. But I just thought that, he played a brilliant game.
Most, if not all, teams have a general.
Yeah.
maybe not all teams, but most have the general.
The teams that challenge.
Lever's got to be in the Lever. It's got to be in the top 3, right?
Yeah,
has to be.
He is when he's on, they're on.
Yeah.
People lift around him, especially in that back half of the ground, and you could see it. Like every time he took one of those float across intercept marks, just watching a pack and reading it better than anyone else.
It's quite amazing watching him drift over.
The run that went after that, that just followed his acts, was brilliant. Like that was the overlap. I had a special mention for that game. That wasn't a Melbourne player. It was for Ed Richards, but it was a special mention both ways.
I'll get into Ed Richards in a bit.
I had a special mention for Ed Richards because, wow, what a brilliant intercept game he had. But I do not know if you could have given the other team more goals off your own boot than he did.
To be fair, I looked into the goals that were kicked. Only one of them was caused by one of his turnovers.
16 intercepts, which is great from 30-odd touches. He went at less than 50% and had 8 direct turnovers.
Yeah.
It was a weird game. Constable did the same for Gold Coast, but we always know he can't really kick.
And against Sydney, it was really
weird.
not.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Look, Ed Richards, I'm going to go through what I'm calling the shame list. These are the even players that played really well, but just annoyed me for one reason or another.
About this earlier in the week.
So some of them we've covered. Ed Richards, 16 intercepts, went at like 50% efficiency. Awful.
8 direct turnovers.
Radigalia, I already mentioned, giving up several goals. We already talked about Cox, Ryan and Young.
Yep.
And Wiedering and Young. Harry Sheasel.
It wasn't a defensive game. He laid 0 tackles.
30 plus disposals, 0 tackles. I'd rather give votes to
Gimby,
who played midfield.
Any pressure acts either.
Nah, it's...
it was a Dacos game. We talked about it last year with Dacos.
Dacos
he played
is
as
also
an extra,
in the mentions
he's
for
an
the
extra,
exact same
He's an
thing.
extra midfielder. He's not a defender. It's the same as you look at Tui at Geelong. Like, they're not defenders. They're just a third wingman.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's a modern football role. But it's not a defensive role.
It's not a defensive role. People might have to... Maybe not Harry Sheasel so much, but Nick Dacos might need to start getting a tag. A bit of pressure on him might actually affect
we saw
their
teams do it.
chains.
Sydney did it and nullified him in that
I think
prelim. It's weird that we've come back. We watched him be nullified in a prelim, and we come into round 1 this year, and Geelong have a whole host of players that could have done it and didn't. You got back there. You've got obviously O'Connor's a great choice for it. You've got Buse could go up to the other end and do the same thing because we know he can kick goals as well when he needs to.
I think even if before Stewart went down,
Tui
even
could
if
do it.
Atkins went to him and just roughed him up a little bit.
It was strange that nothing went to him.
Nothing.
And look, they looked hot, but they also clearly wanted that. There was spite in the way they played that game. We saw the bit of biff at 3/4 time.
I think that's a rare since 2022 rare coaching miss from Scott, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Geelong just went into that game expecting another game and should have been prepared for Collingwood's absolute best because they were going to turn it on. After the game, the 2 games they played
They dropped out
year,
of finals by a point.
Yeah, and 2 goals to Geelong twice last year. Both because once Cameron and once Rowan just turned it on for a half of football. They were always going to come out with fire in their bellies with an almost full-strength side. I think that we talked about this all year last year, that people kept talking about Collingwood being this, up-and-coming team. They named the 4th oldest and 3rd most experienced team in the comp last week.
It's just that they do have really good youth.
They've got good youth. But, they are an experienced football team who made a grand final in 2018 and made a prelim in 2019.
Yeah.
They just had a couple of shit seasons, and that happens in football. But it's weird to see them referred to as this, resurgence. They missed 1 year of finals.
Yeah. Back to the sin list, the shame list, real quick. James Sicily, not really shame. He had a fantastic game, best on ground.
When you play
for
in the back line and the other team gets 120 odd points.
Yeah, it's good to see him playing well. I was worried he might drop off again after last year, but
not
worthy
a shame.
captain.
Not a shame list, just one that I thought was an honourable mention, an actual honourable mention, but his team lost by a lot, so it's hard to put him in there. With Harris Andrews. I thought, as captain, he tried his absolute hardest. He had 9 contested one-on-ones, only lost 2 of them. A whole bunch of intercepts and spoils. I just thought he had a solid game without starring. And didn't give away too many goals or anything. It was just that Port's midfield destroyed Brisbane, which is embarrassing considering Brisbane's midfield. But yeah, he was good.
Last honourable mention / shame list for me, Jeremy McGovern and Tom Barras.
Oh, when you let Larky kick 6 goals from 8 disposals, you just let him have everything where he wants it. That's an awful game.
With the 2 of them and North's lack of
they should be
distinct height,
game.
They should be.
They had several moments to win that game as well. I thought it would. They got jumped which young teams will jump you. But with the experience on that West Coast list and the way they came back into that game and hit the lead twice, there's no way North should be winning that game. That was an embarrassing and almost unfathomable loss from a team that is meant to be proving themselves this year to have had a blip last year.
Especially with
if anything, they looked worse than last year.
Especially with the fact that you've got such experience in key roles. Your midfield has Shuey, Sheed, and Yo / halfback.
Yeah.
Your backline, your main anchors there, Barras.
Obviously no Yo this week, but yeah.
And McGovern.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Yo didn't play. My
Hurd
bad.
as well.
Yeah.
It's a more experienced team than they played like under that pressure. And we saw last year North didn't know how to win games when they had them in their hands. And West Coast just couldn't figure out how to beat a team that was mostly kids. That is a very young North team, especially without playing Goldstein.
All right. So that's all of my honourable mentions. Do you have anyone else?
I'm out of honourable mentions.
All right. So I've broken the curse. Jack has not. You voted for a Geelong and a Carlton player.
Oh,
so
didn't even think about it. I have done that. That's true. Speaking of Carlton and the draw.
Yeah.
You know Rocky 3?
I know of it.
You know, at the end of that movie, the kind of the climax of the movie's happened, and then the two great rivals are having their rematch, the friendly rematch. Apollo and Rocky are fighting, and they both go to throw the first punch at the same time, and the movie cuts out.
Yeah.
That would have been a better ending of that game. If I just watched that, I don't see that. I see that Lynch takes the mark with a minute to go, and the game ends. I don't find out till next week. Lynch takes the mark. There's 6 points the difference. There's still 45 seconds to go, and he takes the mark.
You could have turned that TV off at that exact moment, and you know he would have kicked it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have known if one of them kicked a goal afterwards. I wouldn't have known that he took the full 30 seconds to kick it.
I'm glad that more football will be coming, because I'm sick of talking about the moments that come after that event.
We talked about this between ourselves on end. I couldn't believe the commentators trying to rail on
Lockie O'Brien.
He kicked it straight to him. He
Lace
fell over
out
on one of the dodgy bits of turf at the MCG, which I don't even know if we need to talk about it. It's been done so much in the media this week. But
did you see, though, that I clapped, that's going to come up on the mic.
Yep.
Did you see that those Pink concerts are going to take place like a week before round 1 of next year?
Awesome. We've learned our lesson then. That's really good. And I saw people like, no one got injured in the other games. So do you see people slipping over? Like the Carlton-Richmond game, we talked about it while it was on.
AFL 360 did a
It looked
smash
like
cut.
it was wet. They were falling over everywhere.
Yeah.
And the players said that there were some parts of the ground that were hard and some that were soft. So as soon as your foot hits the soft expecting the hard, of course you're going to fall over.
The worst was when Doherty came out and said he was worried about doing another ACL.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
Stewart's one was weird because you saw him hit his foot on the ground and it just slipped and he just kept going.
Yeah.
De Koning just running backwards and looking like he got shot in that same patch of grass.
He got Tyrone Vickery. He just went down.
There were so many bits in that. And then, Mackay falling over on that same patch.
The exact same. I think it's the exact same place where De Koning
was running backwards.
Slipped/fell, whatever you want to call it.
It was a mockery, really.
It's going to be rough for whoever's playing on Sunday in the gather
they
round.
Had 3 games in a row, just back to back to back on a ground that had not been resurfaced properly yet. Embarrassing, really.
Yeah, it's amateur. Good on you, Gil. And I have to laugh at the coaches who are trying to avoid any drama, and also Jared Waitley, because he's just claiming the concerts are worth it. It didn't cause any effect on the games.
I found it so funny. Like I get that Chris Scott rubs people the wrong way because of the way he talks. He's very blasé. There's a lot of arrogance to the way he speaks. But the fact that a journalist goes, "Do you think that it had anything to do with the injuries?" And he tried to, as carefully as possible, be like, "This is the number 1 sport in this country. This ground is mostly used for this sport. Maybe a week out from round 1 there shouldn't be concerts." And everyone's like, "Wow, he's making excuses." It's like,
I did see the word excuses a lot.
Very funny. Like.
So I'm going to go slightly back to that Hawthorn game.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I read a stat that if you include every single Hawthorn game from last year, and I think the year before, this is the lowest pressure rating they've had for an entire game in the last 2 years.
Oh, and they were bad last year.
They were bad, and they had nothing. They had nothing, and I'm worried
Essendon just had fun. Like there was some Nick Martin kicks inside 50 where he's almost bending over to kick it around a Hawthorn player who's feigning a smother, and he's just dabbing people on the chest because there's no pressure inside 50 either. And it made them look like world beaters. And look, I hope Essendon are better this year because I prefer competition. But I really think it was more of a case of Hawthorn's misery.
You can say that just from the pressure rating alone,
Sam
right?
Mitchell coming out, but we just didn't expect this. You lost everyone. Like O'Meara, Mitchell, McAvoy, 3 for starters of
Gunston.
leadership. Gunston, Brewster's obviously out for this game. It's a bit of a blip. Hardigan gets delisted. Shields gets delisted. There's just so much missing.
And it's worrying because you look at sides that have done this before, like when Carlton ripped out all their youth, or Melbourne under Neeld. They lost and lost and lost and then didn't know how to win.
The rebuild didn't happen because of the picks. Like the rebuild happened a lot later. They had to rebuild their whole culture. And this is a Hawthorn team that's won a premiership every decade for like the last 6 decades.
7-year average. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
We did, yeah. And like it's strange to think that because they don't do this.
They look
like
a decade away.
Yeah, when they dropped out and they got Franklin and Roughhead, they spent 3 years outside the 8. It wasn't a proper they didn't lose everyone. They still had players like Crawford and Crode on their list. Whereas this time everything's gone, which is a worry.
It's it is, and you can't really rely on just having Sicily to hold everything together.
As good as he is,
a lot of those other players will come on, and they have some great players on their list.
Their young talent does look exciting, but it's just that you can't rely on that alone. That's meant to mix with the experience and the cool heads under pressure.
He's got this year and next year, I reckon, before any pressure comes on him.
Yeah,
so
if they don't start winning games, and it has to be winning games, not just your honourable losses.
I think if they win, I'm probably expecting them to win maybe 3 or 4 this year. If 3 or 4, they'll want to be winning 6 next year.
Yeah, I think they'll struggle to win 4 games this year. I do agree. We talked about this a little bit. But the weird outrage about Sauce, whom the medal of this podcast is named, was so strange to me because, for context, if anyone's listening and don't know what it was Jack Silvagni's 100th game, which made them only the 3rd club ever to have a grandfather, father and son play 100 games between them, which is very cool. And he came to the game, he was in the crowd, he spent the whole game with their family, and then he left after the game when the family went back into the rooms. Because he works for St Kilda.
I think you're getting the time frame wrong. Wasn't the celebration before the game started, and he wasn't in the rooms with them for that?
Right. Okay.
He was
either
with
way,
them before and after.
Yeah. Either way,
or maybe he
works for another club. We've already talked. You and I talked about Daisy Pearce not being allowed into the team's rooms because she is a Geelong coach, which absolutely makes sense. It makes sense for him not to be in that club's rooms because, despite being an absolute champion of the club, he works for another team at the moment in a professional capacity, especially as a list manager, where you don't want a list manager in your rooms talking to your players.
No.
But I find it funny that there's this weird... If you're Jeremy Cameron and you suggest that you'd rather be at the birth of your child than a game of football, especially in round 1, you're a beta cuck and, the troops would never...
Jack.
But if you're not in the rooms of an opposition club when your son plays his 100th game, then, there's a family rift. You can't win this culture war bullshit. There's no... you're either an asshole or you're soft. There's no in between. You can't be...
It's because everything has to be an outrage or a news story or an overreaction.
And that's we talk about the outrages of, Fyfe. Sumich fucking back page of the West Australian this week.
Fyfe, they said it was his worst game ever.
Fyfe must play midfield or Freo will never win a premiership. It's mate, they almost made the top 4 last year without Fyfe in the team. He was injured all year. They looked better without him. It makes sense to try and slot him into the forward line instead of break that cohesion in the midfield of Sarong, Brayshaw, Brodie, which looked amazing last year.
And I guess O'Meara's there now too.
Yeah. Why would Fyfe play midfield when they looked better without him?
And I think it's also, and we'll use this to segue because I want to talk about Freo in general, but I think it's also the fact that his body doesn't hold up to midfield play.
It's protecting him for longevity.
I'm sure maybe during the year he will have stints in the midfield, but only brief ones.
And he should be a break glass midfielder. Put him in there.
Because if you're in a game and things are tight and suddenly Nathan Fyfe is lining up next to you in the midfield, you start to go, oh shit.
Yeah, you're thinking about things. And even that year he won the Brownlow, he missed 6-8 games.
I don't know if he missed that many, but he was definitely under the radar.
But yeah, it's very strange to me that that's one of the big reactions. Damien Barrett did it as well. We've seen enough to know that he can't play there. It's have we seen one game when they couldn't kick inside 50 properly?
Technically, we've seen 3 games, and he's kicked 7 goals out of it, hasn't he? Or is it 3?
3 and 3. He's only kicked 6.
Okay.
Didn't get a goal on the weekend. But we have seen enough to know it should work.
And we mentioned it before, but the problem is the game plan. And I hate to say this because they have an uncompromising defence. That's great. I love to see that. But AFL has trended over the past... Well, basically since Richmond won...
They don't have enough playmaking in the midfield.
Since Richmond won in 2017...
I can criticise his play as 2017.
Yeah, it needs to be. You need to have gears.
I
You
can
need to be able to slow down
criticise his
defensively
play
and
on the
attack.
weekend as much as possible. He definitely, fumbled under the pressure of the situation. But losing Akers from that Freo side, I think, is big for them because he was a playmaker on their wings.
Yeah.
And that was really what they were lacking on the weekend. They didn't have that run and build that he brings to the game. And obviously he dropped that mark at the end of the Carlton game and had a few missed kicks. But
He didn't have the greatest first showing, but I think he's got the
I think
potential.
at Freo last year we saw that he when he makes that play, he really builds for them, and they missed that on the weekend. They really did.
It's a mixture of that and Mundy's kicking.
Yeah,
He's
it's both
been
of
a
them,
great
right?
kick
That's
for
the
15
inside
years.
50s that they were having last year that they're not now.
Yeah, and you can see straight away how much of a difference that made. I don't remember the other team they played in the preseason, but they played Adelaide, who were very mixed.
They looked good for half a game and then just forgot to play.
Which has been Adelaide for the last
That was
couple of years,
Adelaide,
hasn't it?
Last year, absolutely. Yeah, it was a weird one. I do have. I'm bringing your segment back. I'm keeping it alive. It's my new favourite thing. I've got some who would wins.
Oh, okay.
If you're still talking Freo, I'm happy to talk
All right,
Freo.
we can sneak in this now. Yeah, sure.
All right, so I've got three for you.
I've got none.
One is who would win at basketball.
Oh.
5 Scott Pendleburys or 3 Owies and 2 Nat Nuis.
5 Pendleburys.
You reckon?
Yeah.
I feel like the balance of Nat Nuis.
I've watched Scott Pendlebury play football. He's not losing that.
Yeah, you may be right. I think that Nat Nui's height
knee
helps,
is
you know?
shot.
That's true. He can't run.
Are we talking prime Natanui's?
Well, I didn't think of that, but originally I was thinking now all of them.
When I did 22 Cooters, I specified which Cooter.
prime. Well, here's some primes for you.
Okay.
22 Belchos,
Belchos.
prime Belchos, or 22 prime Gumbletons.
Oh. Nil all draw?
I tried to think of the most Belcho player I could think of.
Bell Chambers wins.
And I landed on Scotty Gumbleton. I think Bell Chambers' best is better.
How many games did Gumbleton play?
Oh, plenty. Freo and Essendon. I reckon he would have played 110.
I'm looking it up right now. So
All right, we'll hold that. Scotty Gumbleton. My guess is 112.
He played 35 games.
35
Jack.
games? All right, never mind.
He didn't play a single game for Freo.
Really?
Yeah, because he was terrible.
He was terrible.
And I mean that in the nicest way.
Oh yeah,
possible.
obviously better than either of us, but also a foot taller. All right, and now for the thoroughbred, and this is not a question of who was the best player, which is a kind of like you did with your Ablett scenario.
That was funny.
Where I said that obviously Junior I think is a better footballer, but Senior wins that in a one-on-one or over the ground. 22 Pavliches and 22 Blixarves.
I think.
Because I thought like they can both play.
That one is really hard.
They can both play literally everywhere, much like the Goods Cooter one.
I think my recency bias is leaking in. I feel like 22 Blitzarves
I
wins
think
this
that
one.
his ruck and wing work.
I think his defensive work would be better than
Yeah.
Pavlich's.
Yeah,
I think he would nullify more.
I think that's what that's
because
what the difference
Blitzarves can tag.
Pavlich is a better footballer. Like no doubt, he's won all Australians. Ruck, bench, full forward, centre half back. Like, don't be wrong.
Fucking even someone as no name as Aaron Joseph was able to tag Gary Ablett Jr. Like Mark Blitzarves is going to tag that entire midfield of Pavlich's.
and then have one full forward Blixarves and one ruck Blixarves.
Probably equal in the ruck contest, maybe leaning Pavlich.
I think Blixarves wins the rucks.
He's taller, right?
Yeah, and has a better leap, I reckon.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Pavlich
one.
rucked in the dark days for Freo.
I think I'm going 22 Blitzarves.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I know you would.
Well, no, I picked it deliberately because I thought Pavlich was a better footballer, but I reckon it's the it's the 22 Blixarves.
Well, I reckon you went too early on the silly stuff because I've still got 3 topics to talk about.
I'm happy to talk about topics.
I want to start on
because we're breaking up the serious with a little bit of goof.
We already covered Freo. The other 2 teams that I think did horribly in round 1. I'm not going to give too much horror to Hawthorn because we
knew that was coming.
We knew it was coming. Brisbane.
Yeah, that was an embarrassing game. Dunkley just did not show. His first half, he was like, I'm here. And then I
think even Ashcroft was...
Ashcroft was very disappointing.
Yeah.
I went into that guy, I talked to you about it. I said, I can't wait to watch the Ashcroft-Horn-Francis battle in the midfield. Just fast, strong excitement. And Horn-Francis gave us all of that. He was fast,
like
he
a
was
prime
strong.
Dangerfield.
His kicking was brilliant.
He was destroying it. Well, okay, that part wasn't Dangerfield.
Yeah, he could kick straight. Oh, I don't want to talk about that. Dangerfield's kicking.
No, we'll ignore that one.
Soul crushing.
Do you think not only was Brisbane's midfield
soundly beaten,
their defensive run wasn't there, but I think it's worse because Adams isn't there.
Yes.
And
he's
you
so
talked
important.
about
They lost Payne as well.
Harris Andrews, but
They lost Payne in the pre-season game against Geelong as well. And without Adams, Payne was going to be a very important part of that team. And he dropping out of that was a big loss. So it's hard to see where... And I don't want to doom and gloom it because I said to you earlier, like they're like, oh, only this many of the teams that have lost by 50 points in round one have made the finals. Like, well, only that many teams that lose in round one really make the finals. There's only
I'm
8 out of 18 teams that make it.
I'm not doom and glooming them,
but
it's
a concerning effort. Like there's a lot to worry about. And I talked to you when you
wrong
said...
one. Payne played. Gardner was the one that was out.
Oh, Gardner was... Sorry, yeah, I knew one of them was missing. I talked to you about how I think Brisbane are a solid home and away team, and they come unstuck when there's a big game or a finals game. That Melbourne game, Melbourne went up there last year at the Gabba and beat them, and they probably should have finished top 2 if they'd won that game. And then obviously we saw how they went against Geelong in the finals when the pressure was on. But home and away, normally they're reliable. And even against a Port Adelaide team that's firing in Adelaide, they shouldn't be losing by that much. Not with the midfield
You'd
they've got.
accept a 15, 20-point loss.
Yeah, and not with that midfield and forward line. Like there is goals everywhere, and they kicked what?
That was the problem. As
eight
soon
or
as the
9 goals?
midfield was done, they had no chance.
And the defensive run was the problem. Port,
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that Brisbane couldn't score enough. It was that Port just scored without fail. They just kept going forward and kicking goals.
And that's one thing that will be a test for Port, is that we still need to see whether Rosie, Butters and Horn-Francis have the defensive game.
When they play
and that
against,
will be tested against Collingwood.
Yes, well, as I say, when they play against Collingwood, Richmond, Carlton, Geelong, Melbourne, the teams that have that pressure in the middle.
Yeah.
You do wonder if they're going to be able to give that same level of intensity.
Even Richmond now.
Yeah, well, as I said, Richmond, Carlton.
Oh, did you say Richmond?
I think I said them. But yeah, I do wonder, and it'd be funny if they knock Collingwood off this week. I think that'd just be from the pinnacle of everybody like Collingwood premiership favourites now to Port just coming out and beating them in Melbourne. I think that'd just be icing on the cake.
It would be, but I'm not convinced.
Oh, I'm tipping Collingwood confidently. Collingwood looked, and like I said, obviously you can make all the excuses for Geelong you want with the defenders being out, but Geelong were in charge of that game, and from the moment Howe went down and there was that 5-minute break, Collingwood got together, recuperated, and kicked 8 goals straight. Just wiped that game off the floor. They obviously allowed Geelong to kick 100 points as well, which isn't fantastic, but
it doesn't really matter.
But they'd allowed Geelong to kick 98 points before they were at 60, and then they just stormed, and their talent all across the middle of the ground was just undeniable. I can't stand the prick, but Jordan De Goey was so far best on ground. He was dominant. Pendlebury was at his best. Dacos, both of them were
side bottom finding
having
space
just
as if
absolute
he was
fun around the ground.
106 years old.
Elliott went missing in the second half, but it didn't matter because he kept them in the game in the first half.
My thing is with them, it's not the brand of football that anyone else in the league is playing. They're playing, if you kick 80 points, we're going to kick 90. If you kick 100, we're kicking 110.
They've got this unstoppable run and fitness that seems to have improved. I think obviously that break helped them to get their breath back because they play such an intense football that you wondered if they were going to be able to keep it up, and then they got that 10-minute break after how...
Hear it. Excuses.
Not excuses. They were the better team. But yeah, once they got that break and they got their run back, Geelong was just no
Maybe
chances.
don't call it a break. Maybe don't call it a break.
Breaking 2 bones in 4 places is a horrific thought.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that he might not play again. But I
reckon it's only medium term. They reckon he'll be back this year, which seems like a really optimistic assessment of what was a horrible
injury.
Like
playing with an entire
like the Reece Palmer of old.
Yeah.
Fyfe
did it as well. Yeah.
All
right. One last. This is goofy. This is the overreaction of the media thing.
Okay. Yeah.
One of these coaches gone by the by.
Yeah.
One of them. Adam Simpson, Matthew Nicks, Luke Beveridge, Stuart Dew. Who's in the most danger?
Not Bevo.
Interesting.
I think Crazy Bevo has a weird hold over that football club.
It's the same as old mate from Port.
Yeah, Hinkley. I don't think Bevo's in as much danger as he maybe should be. Also on the back of the fact that he took them to the finals again last year, and they were in a really good position against Freo in Perth.
Yeah.
So I think it would be an overreaction for him. I think I said it to you earlier. If West Coast don't have 3 wins on the board by the bye, I don't see how Simpson can keep his spot. It's untenable. They should have won that game. If they don't beat GWS this weekend, they are in big trouble as a football club.
It's an interesting one because I feel like Adam Simpson is a good coach.
I agree, but I don't know if he's a good
Well, we don't.
He played his favourites last year. We talked about that. That when you're in that
still
kind
doing
of...
that.
That's what I mean. We talked about when you're in the position they were last year where you couldn't make the finals. Why were they still playing the old men who needed a rest?
Yeah.
Why weren't the kids getting games every week? Why weren't we seeing Bazzo play instead of McGovern? Why weren't we seeing these kinds of changes? And then this year, round one, they come out and do the same thing. Greg Clark's in the waffle, even when Yo and Cully aren't available. I don't know where the improvement comes from. I think our West Coast mate said to us they were the third oldest team listed on the weekend and got beaten by the second youngest team in the comp.
Greg Clark only played 6 games last year.
Yeah, it was all after the middle of the season. But yeah, when you lose to the second youngest team as the third oldest, you're in big trouble. Like that's a real worry. Freo were different last year. I think they were the fourth youngest team in the comp last year and winning games. But North aren't last year. Freo.
Jesus.
North are a different bet.
Clark debuted in a 109-point loss last year.
Yoof.
I think Matthew Nicks might be in the most danger.
Yeah,
I watched their preseason games and they looked really good.
Yeah, their second half was abysmal. GWS
Almost worse than GWS's first half.
It was almost like Coniglio, Green, Kelly, and I can't think of his name. Green, sorry. Yeah, that's why I was confused. Got together in the middle and went, "Hey guys, do you remember we were good at football? Like we're actually a quality midfield." And then from that moment on, it was just Coniglio was that far best on ground. His second half was mercurial. He was in everything. I think he had 14 score involvements and 10 of them were in the second half. He was just dominant in that game. And Tom Green just looks a beast this year. He's taken his game to another level.
Yeah, he looks. He was getting a lot of uncontested ball, which he doesn't
strong and
do.
fast. But I said to you earlier, I don't think they were as bad as they were last year. And then watching that first half, I thought I've gone the early crow here. They look awful, but they really corrected. Himmelberg looked really good. I was glad they didn't put him up forward again. I was really worried. They were talking about it all pre-season. Haynes is an interesting one to me. He does not look the footballer he did in their runner-up year.
No.
That's a strange pick, but I think they looked better, especially in that second half. But they should have won that game at home against Adelaide. That was a game they should be winning. And look, if they beat West Coast in Perth, they've got 2 on the board to start the season, and that's a better start than they were probably expecting.
And how many wins do you think Adelaide need to be on by the bye for Matthew Nicks to survive? Do you reckon he does regardless?
I don't think he does regardless. If they're winless, I think he's in a real worry. But I think 3 or 4 wins and he's still around. I think that they know they're in a rebuild.
Rankin in a rebuild for
Rankin
6
and
years.
Rochelle looked really exciting up forward.
They did.
That was a big one for me. I think Rochelle has the ability to go in the midfield at some stage. It's only his second year on a list, but he's got a big body and what seems like a good tank. But it was the senior players that just couldn't step up. Laird, I don't know if I've seen him play a game that bad.
That was probably one of his worst games in a long time.
20. Sloan was old. It felt like he was old.
He still looked good.
He did.
My worry for Adelaide is they are playing Richmond next week.
Yeah.
Then they're playing Port Adelaide.
Okay.
Then they're playing Fremantle, which is that one's on the line. Then they're playing Carlton before they've got Hawthorn. They could potentially be 5.
Yeah, and go into the bye with 1 win. We talked about their backline obviously because that's what we do.
Yeah,
and we said, we love Duday and Butts looks like a name for the future, but there's not many names back there. I liked seeing Michelani.
Michelanius, I don't know his name.
Debut for them, father-son pick, technically, because his dad was a Glenelg player. I looked it up, that's why I didn't know his name. Played a lot of Glenelg games. But I thought he looked all right for a first-game defender and a genuine first-game defender, like he's a this-year pick. He looked really solid, but they just let scores happen way too easily in that second half.
Way too easily.
GWS were just storming in there and just doing what they wanted, and they were awash. So,
and it could have just been that they were younger and more tired from the heat.
Hot. Yeah. So I know I went to a concert that night, so I know what the heat was like. It was horrible. So I didn't go to that game, and I kind of wish I had now. I watched that first half and wished I hadn't, and then I went, it would have been an exciting second half to be at. But it was a really warm day in Sydney that day, and not something that Sydney or Adelaide would be used to during footy season. So,
no.
It was hot in Melbourne as well, and Perth was okay, and there was no games here.
Weird for us.
Thanks to Ed Sheeran, who was really probably the most important player this weekend.
He had the biggest effect.
And that's why St Kilda won as well. He showed up to their training, got a kit on, got some photos of Jack Steele.
All right, enough of that. Last thing that I have to talk about.
I think we've pretty much run out of time anyway.
We're
this is the longest podcast we've just about ever done.
The only other thing I want to talk about is the bump. Real quick. We don't even have to talk about it too much. Tribunal.
This is the third consecutive season This is the third consecutive season that within the first 3 rounds of the year, Simon Goodwin has told the media that he's instructed his players to stop bumping.
No, they keep bumping.
They don't listen clearly.
They need to be told after round 1 every year.
Yeah. He should remind them before round 1. He should be like, hey lads, remember last year how one of you got suspended for bumping someone in the head? I'm going to remind you beforehand this year. Can't do it anymore. But that one wasn't a bump. I want to highlight that
was a
both
spear tackle.
Both
essentially.
McAdam and Buddy bumped in the one we go. Oh, okay, that's Weeks. Pickett torpedoed himself. Like he launched himself shoulder first at Smith's head after watching Smith get rid of the ball. Like there was nothing football about that act.
It's funny you say that because I've seen people say that McAdams isn't a football act and Cossey's is.
McAdam bumped someone. Like it was a hip and shoulder.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good one. It was ugly.
It was brutal and fast.
I can't fathom how they're trying to challenge that. And I think the AFL needs to bring back the old rule where you could gain weeks if you challenge a stupid decision because he should get more than 4.
I am interested.
Cossey's was the worst of the lot.
At the tribunal, whoever was talking on behalf of the AFL or the tribunal said that Pickett's bump was compared to McAdams glancing.
Well, yeah, but this is what we have to get rid of the...
It doesn't matter.
This is what we have to get rid of the result. The intent needs to be... We talked about this last year. I used it as a highlight when Gaff threw the punch. Like, I was trying to punch him in the collarbone. I was like, I don't care. He was trying to punch him.
If
Pickett went for the upper body with a torpedo jump.
If
like
Bailey
there was
Smith had been knocked out...
Oh, Pickett would have been out for 6-7 weeks.
6 or 7 weeks,
yeah.
Easy.
Which is why it's bizarre, because he didn't know what was going to happen after his feet left the ground.
The outcome should have no effect whatsoever.
No.
If you
especially not with head-high contact. We watch...
McAdam didn't even hit the head. He hit the shoulder, but he still went for a high bump.
We've got former footballers who are, killing themselves or can barely speak or wash themselves or, and yet the AFL comes out and they're like, the head is sacrosanct every year, that we're going to make rule changes to protect the head. And then every year we see an incident like this. Willie Rioli was the great example at the start of last year. Sorry, Junior Rioli was the great example last year. And this year, this is the great setup in round 1. We've seen 3 acts adjudicated completely differently because of the outcome.
Yeah.
We don't know the outcome for years. We don't know... We've seen players like Tuck, the junior Tuck, Shane Tuck, who barely had any on-field concussions, but he had so many hits to the head that caused trauma later on that we don't know yet how much damage it's going to cause. Like, we have to protect the head at all costs. And yeah, if that means getting rid of the bump, then fucking so be it. Like, footballers' brains are more important than our bloodlust and entertainment.
It's awful. And Smith was the only one who didn't go off for a concussion, and he probably should have
been tested, absolutely. It was irresponsible of the Bulldogs not to.
Especially when you're losing that
when
badly.
You're getting currently sued by a former premiership player for concussion, and you don't take your player off to check on him, it seems like a wild oversight.
But Buddy elbowed
he does,
Collins in the head.
Yeah.
Collins went off for a concussion test. Obviously, he's okay.
He was shaken, though. He did not play the same after going off.
But how is that one?
It's the Buddy.
If you tuck your arm in and go and put... Oh, I just don't get it. Anyway.
Well, I thought it was weird with especially the Smith one not going off for the concussion. Because after watching both the Carlton, Richmond and Collingwood Geelong games, anytime someone got hit near the head, they were taken off and tested. Like, you saw so many people just like... Stengel got hit in the shoulder by Howe when Howe injured himself. But Geelong were like immediately like, protocols, take him off, have a look. Yet when Smith gets torpedoed and a melee breaks out because of it, no one at the Bulldogs was like, oh, that big mustachioed bloke who's their medical staff, absolute unit of a man.
Oh, yeah, I know the one.
Didn't go, oh, well, maybe we'll have a look at Smith. At least check him, right?
Yeah, it seems very distasteful.
Especially someone who already has, we know, mental health struggles, and we know that they're impacted more by concussions. It's just I think that we've seen... And look, I think for the most part, other than rusted on old fans who, complain everything's going soft, I think for the most part from football media, we've seen an outcry. Like, I think this week they've all been like, this is baffling. Robbo's not one of those. But I saw from people like...
No, actually, Robbo's been pretty good.
Yeah, I saw from Fitzy talk about it. I saw... Not Mitch Robinson, he was the worst one of them all. But yeah, I saw Fitzy talk about it. I saw Waitley talk about it. Like, this needs to change. We're at a point where we can't be letting people get 1 week or no weeks for hitting someone in the head intentionally.
Robbo said he doesn't care how many games Buddy misses as long as the player that he hits is okay, and he shouldn't have been hit in the first place. So,
unlike
rare W.
Mitch Robinson, unlike Mitch Robinson, who basically said the game's going soft, and that the bump is the reason that people why games of football can be won by the team who isn't the most talented. And I was like, one, generally not. Like the team,
weird coming from someone who was not very talented
and never won a flag, which was my first thought. But also has one of the worst win-loss records in football history. But also I thought, like, you look at the teams of the last, 5 years and which ones won the flags, it's like it's the teams with the most talent on their lists. Like, it's I know that's not always the case, but, in a game where both teams are well coached, the most talented team is going to win, regardless of effort or endeavour. You look at so many players that we say, well, they give their all. Charlie Constable's a great example. He's an effort player, and I love him. I love watching him play at Geelong. I really enjoyed watching him play on the weekend. But players are going to take his spot when that team's fit, because he's not a talented footballer, and that's just how football is.
I'm really interested in his win-loss record now that you've said that, because I actually thought it wouldn't be so bad.
It can't be good, surely. Is that Brisbane?
47%.
Oh, it's better than... I guess he was there at Brisbane's good bit at the end and Carlton's good bit at the start.
Yeah.
The middle patch of his career.
His time at Carlton was mostly 50-50.
That was, I guess he was there
above.
during the Judd years.
And then it dropped off at the end of Carlton and it started Brisbane. And then it was like his last couple of years,
I guess
16-7, 15-4.
Didn't factor in the start at Carlton.
Yeah.
I kind of went end of Carlton.
3 goals in his first game. Smashed Richmond by 80 points.
But yeah, it was a weird take. And a lot of people were just immediately like, hey man, stick to Fortnite.
I mean, Mitch Robinson has the hardest head in football.
Absolutely.
He probably has never had a concussion.
Well, yeah, and then in 10 years' time, we'll find out that he has to take antidepressants because he's had 112 small concussions during his career.
Well, hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
Well, that's a weird place to leave it. But this is almost an hour long.
That's a long episode.
You have to edit this.
It's round 1. Anyway, thanks for joining us. As always, you can find the podcast on our website, on Spotify and Apple. Our website is thebackpocketau.com. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook as the Backpocket AU. Pretty much the same everywhere. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, really, you'll find this. I've got it uploaded everywhere these days. And on YouTube now, which is a nice touch for this season. So enjoy that. That's a long episode, and we will see you next week. Bye. Oh, I can't wait to open some doors.